Hello everyone, this is the 5th Epistle Revelation Fellowship. I'm Reverend Dr. Roger Paul. And today we're going to study paper 148, Training Evangelists at Bethsaida. Let me catch my breath. And let's say a little prayer and get started here. Father, thank you for bringing us together today. Pray that you'll bless this Sunday meeting. And watch over us today, open our hearts and minds that we might learn something and share it with others. We thank you and give you the praise in your son's name, Jesus. Amen. Okay. Pam, do you want to start reading?
Sure. From May, Training Evangelists at Bethsaida. From May 3rd to October 3rd, AD 28, Jesus and the Apostolic Party were in residence at the Zebedee home in Bethsaida. Throughout this 5-month period of dry season, an enormous camp was maintained by the seaside near the Zebedee residence, which had been greatly enlarged to accommodate the growing family of Jesus. This seaside camp, occupied by an ever-changing population of truth seekers, healing candidates, and curiosity devotees, numbered from 500 to 1,500. This tented city was under the general supervision of David Zebedee, assisted by the Alphaeus twins. The encampment was a model in order and sanitation, as well as in the general administration. The sick of different types were segregated and were under the supervision of a believer physician, a Syrian named Elman.
Okay, so the next slide shows us this period of time and where they traveled to. And this is on our website under maps. And also there's another picture of it. And you can see it's along the Sea of Galilee. And you can look at these at your leisure and be slide through. And there's another larger with it enlarged. So you can see Bethsaida's up there at the very northern end of it, where the river comes in. Okay?
Throughout this period, the apostles would go fishing at least one day a week, selling their catch to David for consumption by the seaside encampment. The funds thus received were turned over to the Greek treasurer. The 12 were permitted to spend 1 week out of each month with their families or friends. Which was only minus 1 week.
Yeah.
Okay, while Andrew continued in general charge of the apostolic activities, Peter was in full charge of the school of the evangelists. The apostles all did their share in teaching groups of evangelists, each forenoon, and both teachers and pupils taught the people during the afternoons. After the evening meal, 5 nights a week, the apostles conducted question classes for the benefit of the evangelists. Once a week, Jesus presided at this question hour, answering the holdover questions from previous sessions.
Okay, so y'all keep in mind that this camp was to train evangelists, right? So the way they taught, they would teach them, and then notice here it says both teachers and pupils taught during the afternoon. So the way they did it is they were taught in the morning, some concept or something they needed to learn. And then in the afternoon, both the teachers and the pupils got the opportunity to teach it themselves to each other. And that way they could practice before they went out as evangelists, right? So you learn by being a student first, then you learn by being the teacher, right?
A couple of questions. Did they have abilities to write down notes the way we do nowadays on Sunday?
Well, some people did write during that period of time, but very, very few. Most people were illiterate as far as writing and reading and that sort of thing. Even in the Jewish schools, the way they learn is by rote. the Shazam would read something, and then the pupils would repeat it after him. And they would do that over and over again until they remembered it. You know, so if you think about it, by the time they learned the entire Quran, then they had memorized it all the way through at one time or another. You know, it takes 18 hearings of anything for someone to own it, you know, to remember it. So that's why they did things over and over and over and over again. It was a rote memory type thing. You know, they heard it over and over and over again. And that's why this method of teaching, the way they were doing it here, was very effective, because they would learn one concept, and then the pupils would turn around and teach the same concept over. The difference is, though, here, they gave their interpretation of the concept. And it's kind of just the same way that we teach the Urantia Book. You know, when you teach the Urantia Book, it's your interpretation of what the book says. Right? So it's the same process.
Yeah, I don't think they had pencils and paper.
No, very few people actually wrote. So there were a few, but they were usually considered scribes. You know, they did that sort of
Excuse me.
Okay.
I know in seminary they required you had to get up and give a, once a month, each individual had to give a sermon.
A sermon at least once a month, yeah.
And they would each take turns. Sometimes there'd be 2 or 3 sermons in one meeting.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Jude?
In 5 months, several thousand came and went at this encampment. Interested persons from every part of the Roman Empire and from the lands east of the Euphrates were in frequent attendance. This was the longest settled and well-organized period of the Master's teaching. Jesus' immediate family spent most of this time at either Nazareth or Cana.
So Jesus actually spent this entire 5 months there at this encampment. You know, he did go off by himself and take care of, you know, what they believe was the business of the local universe, but it was pretty much there stable for that period of time.
How was the logistics organized in terms of food, for example?
Well, that was basically Andrew's responsibility to make sure that everyone there at the encampment was fed, and they divided up. You know, Judas was very useful in getting funds to feed the masses. And
How?
so-
Where were the funds?
Donations, mostly from wealthy Jews that had been converted during this period of time. So, several, it's going to mention in this paper a little bit later about influential member of the Sanhedrin actually joined them at this encampment, became a believer in Jesus, and he financed a lot of the feeding and lodging, that sort of thing, for these evangelists over there. You know. And remember, this was a tent city more than anything. You know, they were living in tents. So.
But if they were mad,
Huh?
Yeah, temporary.
Yeah, but then
Temporary housing.
so you need to. So once you have the money, you need to buy it, you need to prepare it, you need to cook it. You need to. I mean, that's a fairly big logistics.
Yeah, and remember that the apostles went out once a week fishing. So they'd take the profit from the fishing and pay for all the expenses of being. So, right. The encampment was not, skip over. The encampment was not conducted as a community of common interest, as was the apostolic family. David Zebedee managed this large tent city so that it became self-sustaining enterprise, just what you were talking about. Notwithstanding that no one was ever turned away, this ever-changing camp was an indispensable feature of Peter's evangelistic training school. Do y'all understand what you're saying here about it not being a common community of common interest? In other words, the apostles and this encampment was considered separate, right? The apostles did things just like they always did. They all shared everything in common. But the encampment did not. You understand what I'm saying here? So people of the encampment, many of them took care of their own needs. All right. The ones that they couldn't, they had a joint fund, make sure everybody was fed and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't considered part of the apostles' family, right?
Apostolic.
Yeah. Okay.
What does apostolic mean? I know with the Catholic Church, it's we used to have a.
Well, it's the difference between being an apostle and a believer, right?
Ooh.
An apostle has dedicated his entire life to the mission of God. A believer is not. A believer is just someone who believes and follows the ways of Christ or Christianity at that time.
And a disciple,
And a disciple is just above a believer. A disciple is someone who
a
believes,
student.
is a student, dedicates as much time as he possibly can, but it's not his full-time vocation like an apostle is. An apostle is a full-time vocation for the Word of God, or for the work of God, right? A disciple is a full-fledged believer in the tendencies, but they can't either afford or they chose not to devote their entire life to the work of God, right?
They just couldn't reconcile.
Huh?
They couldn't reconcile or integrate it into their lifestyle.
That's right, yeah. All right.
Did we didn't read that.
You didn't read that, didn't you?
No.
Hit it twice, didn't you? Okay.
A new school of the prophets. Peter, James, and Andrew were the committee designated by Jesus to pass upon applicants for admission to the school of evangelists. All the races and nationalities of the Roman world and the East, as far as India, were represented among the students in this new school of the prophets. This school was conducted on the plan of learning and doing. What the students learned during the forenoon, they taught to the assembly by the seaside during the afternoon. After supper, they informally discussed both the learning of the forenoon and the teaching of the afternoon.
So they came in, they learned, then they taught, then they come together again and discuss what happened when they taught, right? Or what they learned in the morning, right? So it gives them an opportunity to go over what they've done.
In the discussion of apostle, disciple, where does evangelist fall?
That would be a disciple.
So an evangelist is a disciple.
Yeah, an evangelist would be considered a disciple. A believer would just be someone of the general public that believes in the teachings of Jesus, but doesn't work at it, right? That's the way they set it aside. Diane?
Each of the apostolic teachers taught his own view of the gospel of the kingdom. They made no effort to teach just alike. There was no standardized or dogmatic formulation of theological doctrines. Though they all taught the same truth, each apostle presented his own personal interpretation of the Master's teaching. And Jesus upheld this presentation of the diversity of personal experience in the things of the kingdom, unfailingly harmonizing and coordinating these many and divergent views of the gospel at his weekly question hours. Notwithstanding this great degree of personal liberty in matters of teaching, Simon Peter tended to dominate the theology of the school of evangelists. Next to Peter, James Zebedee exerted the greatest personal influence.
And we know Peter and James Zebedee had a quite diverse concept of what the gospel was supposed to be, right? We know the gospel is the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, but all the theology involved in that, Peter had one idea, James Zebedee had a totally different, right? And that came to a head later on in the churches, which is in the church history. Now, the other interesting thing about this is teaching these evangelists and teaching back then, they did not have a standardized or dogmatic doctrine, did they? A theology. And yet, what happened to the church, the early church, which turned into the Catholic Church? They became very dogmatic, didn't they? the council in 390 AD actually set up the dogma of the Catholic Church, and it went that way, up to this day.
So what's the difference between what James thought and Peter?
Well, one big thing was the concept that Peter gave into Paul's teaching on the doctrine of sacrifice, right? James Zebedee did not. James Zebedee didn't agree with many things that Paul the Apostle taught completely. So James Zebedee ended up with the church at Philadelphia, which taught a totally different doctrine than the other churches, because Paul went around the other churches teaching what he believed the gospel was, which was that Jesus died for everyone's sin.
And this is after Jesus was crucified.
Right.
That Peter would have been teaching Paul's teachings.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, Peter started out with his own concepts of theology, but during the period of Paul was such a dynamic and forceful man, he kind of gave in to Paul's teaching because of this right here, because he was taught to allow everyone to have their own doctrine. The problem came in that Paul's doctrine overrode what Peter had been taught and what Peter had been teaching up to that point. So, kind of interesting how,
And Paul was not an apostle.
Paul was not an apostle. They call him the Apostle Paul, but he was a self-proclaimed apostle, right? Paul was not the replacement of Judas. Remember that. There was another apostle who replaced Judas, not Paul. We really never hear about anything that Paul, the apostle that replaced Judas, did.
Okay. 100 and more evangelists trained during this fire by the seaside represented the material from which, accepting Abner and John's apostles, the later 70 gospel teachers and preachers were drawn. The school of evangelists did not have everything in common to the same degree as did the 12.
We discussed that a little bit earlier, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we got it.
They did not have everything in common. The 12 apostles shared everything. They shared their financial problems. They all got food from the same source. Their logic came from the same source. Their theology, everything they did surrounded around Jesus. But the evangelists did not. They were funded by different people, by themselves, and when they developed their gospel, their teaching of the gospel, they gave the interpretation that they believed was right. Okay? Where the apostles tried to stay along the same line as much as possible. So they had everything in common as much as possible, financially, theologically, psychologically, everything. But the 70 did not.
Okay, so they were just talking about the material aspect, not the teaching.
Yeah, they're talking about the material aspect, but remember the 70, when they were allowed to teach the gospel according to their beliefs, of what they interpret the gospel was, which they heard from Jesus, right? About the Fatherhood and the Brotherhood. That's why not only the 70, but later on Paul comes along and he totally changes the gospel, right, to what he wants it to say. Okay.
These evangelists, though they taught and preached the gospel, did not baptize believers until after they were later ordained and commissioned by Jesus as the 70 messengers of the kingdom. Only 7 of the large number healed at the sundown scene at this place were to be found among these evangelistic students. The nobleman's son of Capernaum was one of these trained for gospel service in Peter's school.
So all those people that were out in front of the house that night that were healed, 1,000 of them, right? Only 7 of them came to become evangelists. Only 7. That's how effective. Okay.
And that sundown scene, was it referring to something happening before?
Yeah, you know, we talked about the last paper, when was the last paper?
Couple of months ago.
Yeah. 2, Bethsaida Hospital. In connection with the seaside encampment, Elman, the Syrian physician, with the assistance of the corps of 25 young women and 12 men, organized and conducted for 4 months what should be regarded as the kingdom's first hospital. At this infirmary, located a short distance from the south of the main tenant city, they treated the sick in accordance with all known material methods, as well as by the spiritual practices of prayer and faith encouragement. Jesus visited the sick of this encampment not less than 3 times a week and made personal contact with each sufferer. As far as we know, no so-called miracles of supernatural healing occurred among the 1,000 afflicted and alien persons who went away from this infirmary improved and cured. However, the vast majority of these benefited individuals ceased not to proclaim that Jesus had healed them. So during this period of time, 4-month period of time, Jesus would visit the sick 3 times a week at this encampment, and yet he did no miracles. He let them heal on their own accord and according to their own faith.
So, I find it interesting that it says, as far as we know.
As far as we know.
So they're talking about, that's the midwayers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, midwayers don't know everything.
No, by no stretch of the imagination. Even during the resurrection of Christ, you know. Matter of fact, there's a new movie coming out the 19th. It's called Risen. Y'all might want to go see it. It's an agnostic view of the rising of Christ when he rose from the dead. But what made me think of that, y'all might want to go see that. It might be interesting. What made me think about that is during the resurrection, they didn't even know what really happened at first to his body, you know, during the resurrection. So that came later. So kind of interesting. They don't know everything. The master physical controllers had to have known, but the midwayers didn't, right? Okay. Can you take the next one, Rodney? Oh, is it you? Oh, is it mine?
No, you just read the last
I
one.
just read the last one. Yeah, it's your turn.
Many of the cures effected by Jesus in connection with his ministry in behalf of Elman's patients did indeed appear to resemble the working of miracles, but we were instructed that they were only just such transformations of mind and spirit as may occur in the experience of expectant and faith-dominated persons who are under the immediate and inspirational influence of a strong, positive, and beneficent personality whose ministry banishes fear and destroys anxiety.
Wow,
That is incredible.
that's powerful.
That is
That
very
is.
powerful, yeah.
Wow.
That is very powerful. It's kind of interesting too here is that these are the midwayers speaking in this, talking in this, right? So it's interesting they say, it says, but we were instructed that they were just such transformations. So even the midwayers, you know, were puzzled about what was really going on. So somebody instructed them, more than likely one of the Melchizedeks or one of the angels or something along this line. You know.
And I can only imagine they were lied to, so therefore
Yeah,
it's probably
pretty close to being accurate.
but to me this is very enlightening.
Yeah.
This is really what I had a question about that for a long time, and that's really it.
Yeah, it's your own faith and it's your own personality that allows these healings to, you know, banish fear and destroys anxiety. So the body is a self-healing organism if you let it, right? All right.
I'm not remember reading that, but it's just a long
Yeah.
Yes.
Elman and his associates endeavored to teach the truth to these sick ones concerning possession of evil spirits, but they met with little success. This belief that physical sickness and mental derangement could be caused by the dwelling of a so-called unclean spirit in the mind and body of the afflicted person was well nigh universal.
And this was the case even up till recently, isn't it? You know, many churches still believe that illness is a demon possession, right? Or a unclean spirit in these people. And you can go to many, many churches yet, and they spend large amounts of time praying over people trying to get spirits to leave them, right? So this is still going on, and we know from the previous paragraph this is not the case at all, right?
Okay, in all his contact with the sick and afflicted, when it came to the technique of treatment or the revelation of the unknown causes of disease, Jesus did not disregard the instructions of his paralyzed brother, Emmanuel. Given error, he embarked upon the venture of the Urantia incarnation. Notwithstanding this, those who ministered to the sick learned many helpful lessons by observing the manner in which Jesus inspired the faith and confidence of the sick and suffering.
Okay, do y'all remember what the instruction was from Emmanuel? He recommended that Jesus not perform miracles or heal the sick without much thought, right? In other words, he recommended him not to go around doing miracles. Emmanuel felt that it was not the best representation of the Father's will, right? And so Jesus followed his advice. Now we're talking about the creator of the local universe. He controls everything, right? So,
But here we need to distinguish between, I think, the multitude of the diseases that we're talking about are the self-inflicted. You have bad habits, whether they are physical, whether they are mental, you know, the fear, anxiety, and all that, they do create diseases, right?
yes.
And I can see how that works. However, there are some instances of disease that are beyond that, like the leprosy.
Oh yeah,
right?
leprosy. Anything that's biological that invades the body. And we know there's many, many of those.
Right.
Right.
And I don't think here we are talking about at least in this camp, in the previous paragraph, we're talking about the people who have the leprosy.
Leprosy.
Right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the more, you know.
Generally ill, not
Yes.
yeah.
Right. Like having a cough or a sore throat, or like,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a bit more, but of that
Yeah.
kind, which is, and then for the real like handicapped, severely handicapped, then this is where I don't think this would suffice, right? You could feel better.
Yeah,
But,
it would be beneficial even
Right.
then, Jill, because the physicians known for many, many hundreds of years that a patient that has a positive attitude or a positive attitude about how the disease has affected him and how he can heal himself, that sort of thing, it changes the outcome of disease greatly.
Mhm.
It really does.
Well, I read recently, I forget which paper it was, that Jesus was in a home and there were so many people that they couldn't get this one sick person, and so they climbed the roof and they put him down through the roof, and then he said, "Get up and walk," and he walked away.
We're going to talk about that tonight.
Oh.
Okay. Who's Jill, I think you're up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. The camp disbanded a short time before the season, for the increase in chills and fever drew on.
Probably because of cold weather or that sort of thing. Okay, let's go ahead and take the next one.
3. The Father's business. Throughout this period, Jesus conducted public services at the encampment less than a dozen times and spoke only once in the Capernaum synagogue, the second Sabbath before their departure, with the newly trained evangelists upon their second public preaching tour of Galilee.
So who was in charge in teaching these people? Because Jesus only taught about 3 times. You know. The apostles, right? It was the apostles that were responsible to teach the evangelists what they needed to know to go out. That's why Jesus spent so much time with the apostles early on, teaching them all the concepts he wanted them to know to prepare them for teaching others and prepare them for what was coming, right? Because he knew he would not always be with them, right? Not since the baptism had the Master been so much alone as during this period of evangelist training. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that word today. Encampment at Bethsaida. Whenever any one of the apostles ventured to ask Jesus why he was absent so much from their midst, he would invariably answer that he was about the Father's business. And that's what he was, right? He was running his universe from the earth. We'll leave it down this time.
During these periods of absence, Jesus was accompanied by only 2 of the apostles. He had released Peter, James, and John temporarily from their assignments as his personal companions, that they might also participate in the work of training the new evangelist candidates, numbering more than 100. When the Master decided to go to the hills about the Father's business, he would summon to accompany him any 2 of the apostles who might be at liberty. In this way, each of the 12 enjoyed an opportunity for close association and intimate contact with Jesus.
Okay, so we know that Peter, James, and John were assigned as Jesus' companions, right? Whenever he would go off. But during this period of time, because they were all so busy training the evangelists, he would take any 2 that was available, to go with him.
Can you remind us why he had companions when he had to go to the Father's business?
Well, the only reason they stayed in the book was so that Jesus would not feel alone there all the time, be alone. They felt like everyone should always have a companion in everything they do to share the experience of life. And that even Jesus had companions to share his experience of life. So that's why they were assigned to him. And I think the reason they stated in it when they did that was so that the work would not become so overwhelming and cause depression, because it's pretty weighty to do. Well, even doing here what we do each week. It's a lot of spiritual weight on you to be responsible to teach what you think the will of God is, right? So it keeps you from being feeling lonely, getting depressed, and that sort of thing. I know personally, I could not teach on Wednesday night if I did not have the group of people that come and participate, right? Because without that interaction of other people, you become dry, and it can get depressing, overwhelmingly depressing, because of how little we know, and how little we are prepared to do this kind of work. So.
It has not been revealed for the purposes of this record, but we have been led to infer that the Master, during many of these solitary seasons in the hills, was in direct and executive association with many of his chief directors of universe affairs. Ever since about the time of his baptism, this incarnated sovereign of our universe had become increasingly and consciously active in the direction of certain phases of universe administration. And we have always held the opinion that in some way not revealed to his immediate associates, during these weeks of decreased participation in the affairs of earth, he was engaged in the direction of those high spirit intelligences who were charged with the running of a vast universe, and that the human Jesus chose to designate such activities on his part as being about his Father's business.
We can't even imagine what those responsibilities can be. No sense in even commenting about that. I wouldn't even want to speculate.
To run a universe.
Run a universe.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Many times when Jesus was alone, for hours, but when two of his apostles were nearby, they observed his features undergo rapid and multitudinous changes, although they heard him speak no words. Neither did they observe any visible manifestation of celestial beings who might have been in communion with their master, such as some of them did witness on subsequent occasions.
So they did see him with celestial beings occasionally, but not during this period of time.
So it's like as if he was like talking and having gesture and all that,
Yeah.
without speaking the word
The
of
words, and nobody was there. Yeah. You can see why they, many of the Sanhedrin thought he was insane. You know, because they hear reports
Well-
about such things.
Well, no, that they didn't know. Only the apostles were
Yeah,
that.
probably so.
So I think that's about the miracles and,
Yeah.
the danger on them. I don't think, but yes, indeed, if one of us would observe someone like that today,
Yeah,
okay, that's a case of insanity. That's what we would conclude as
yeah.
our first idea. So.
That would be too.
Well, y'all remember pre-cell phones, if you saw somebody walking around talking, you'd think they were
Yeah.
a little touch. Right now, it's common thing, see somebody walking around talking.
Talking to themselves.
Yeah.
I can understand.
You?
For evil, sin, and iniquity. It was the habit of Jesus 2 evenings each week to hold special converse with individuals who desired to talk with him in a certain secluded and sheltered corner of the Zebedee garden. At one of these evening conversations in private, Thomas asked the Master this question: why is it necessary for man to be born of the Spirit in order to enter the kingdom? Is rebirth necessary to escape the control of the evil one? Master, what is evil? When Jesus heard these questions, he said to Thomas,
Do not make the mistake of confusing evil with the evil one. More correctly, the iniquitous one. He whom you call the evil one is the son of self-love, the high administrator who knowingly went into deliberate rebellion against the rule of my father and his loyal sons. I have already vanquished these sinful rebels. Catch that? Make clear in your mind these different attitudes towards the Father and His universe. Never forget these laws or revelation to the Father's will. Who is He talking about here?
Yes.
Huh?
Lucifer? Okay, yes.
He could be talking about Lucifer, but there's a question here. Is he talking about Caligastia? Because the one that most people think of as the devil is who?
Can you guess?
Caligastia. So they're referring to Caligastia. He could be referring to Lucifer, right? Because Caligastia actually followed Lucifer into rebellion. Now, since he's talking to Thomas, he had told them about Lucifer and Caligastia. So he's probably speaking of Lucifer here, right? But he could also be talking about Caligastia because he followed the same suit as Lucifer, right? Okay.
So is he saying that they have done evil, but they are not iniquitous? I'm confused.
No, they are iniquitous, is what he's saying, not just evil. Let me go back here. Oh, it's still there.
It says the high administrator
The high administrator,
who knowingly went into deliberate rebellion against the rule of my father and his laws.
that would be Lucifer, would it not?
I think so.
Would be Lucifer.
Okay, but think about it, Caligastia did exactly the same thing. He was a high administrator of the planet, right? But that's what I'm saying, he's probably talking about Lucifer.
But in the next paragraph it says evil, what evil is.
Yeah. And he's trying to make distinguish the difference between evil and the evil one, right? And we know the evil one would be referring to Lucifer.
Could he be also talking in general about, we all at some point or another have done some form of evil, but we are not necessarily evil one in the sense that we have embraced evil. It's mostly mistakes, right?
Right. And he's going to break that down in the next 3 paragraphs here. So.
Yeah, because here on the earth, we think we have, Satan as being the evil one. I mean, it's always Satan, Satan,
It's
Satan.
always Satan,
you know.
Satan, Satan. Yeah, but we know that Satan is more of a in-between guy,
Yeah,
right?
I know we do, but,
Yeah,
and the churches,
but we know more about Satan. Well, we hear more about Satan because he was mentioned more in the Old Testament, right?
Was I just not, ever paying attention? I always thought they were interchangeable, that they were same being.
No, that's the way the church feels about it.
Yeah.
They think they're
That's
the
what
same.
I'm,
Yeah, they don't understand that they're 3 separate beings. And they even mention in that list Beelzebub, right?
that's right, he was on the radio.
And he was the head of the midway creatures that rebelled. So, we got lots of names going around and they all think that he's the same being and he's not, they're not. Now, the reason I put these next 3 paragraphs in the same slide is because this is what really Jesus breaks down as evil, sin, and iniquity. This is probably the most important teachings in this book for us to understand, is these 3 paragraphs. Okay, so I want to do them all together.
And the church will be very well inspired to read those and integrate that into their doctrine. It will
That's
change a
exactly
lot.
right. This is what they should be teaching.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and I think you're right.
evil is the unconscious or unintended transgression of the divine law, the Father's will. Evil is likewise the measure of the imperfectness of obedience to the Father's will. Sin is the conscious knowing and deliberate transgression of the divine law, the Father's will. Sin is the measure of unwillingness to be divinely led and spiritually directed. Iniquity is the willful, determined, and persistent transgression of the divine law, the Father's will. Iniquity is the measure of the continued rejection of the Father's loving plan of personality survival and the Son's merciful ministry of salvation. I mean, I feel like I've done all 3.
Okay, but this breaks what each one is down, right? Evil is the unconscious or unintended transgression of the divine law or the Father's will, right? So if you think of evil, evil's anything against the will of God that you do unconsciously, right? That's evil. That's the whole everything in a nutshell, right? However, sin is the conscious knowing and deliberate transgression. So it goes from evil to sin is when you realize that evil is wrong or against Father's will and you still do it. That's when it turns into sin. So do we all go around probably sometimes doing things that are evil? Probably so. More than likely.
And by definition, it's unconscious.
It's unconscious.
So there might be a lot of things that are inside us, okay, this is the way, and we have no idea.
Yeah,
And we are
really
breaking
know.
it.
We don't really know. That's what the thought adjuster is supposed to help us define, right? What is the Father's will, right? So sin is knowing the Father's will, and you know something's wrong, but you do it anyway because you want to do it yourself, right? That's sin. Okay?
Typically for selfish reasons.
Typically for selfish reasons. That's exactly right. When you go out and steal something, is that evil or sin?
It depends if you are hungry or not.
That's sin.
Yes.
Why is it sin? Because it's a conscious transgression of the Father's law. What's the Father's law about that? We love one another as we love ourselves, and we love each other as we love God, right? So, huh?
What about Robin Hood?
Same thing. It's still sin. Because we know that it's wrong and we do it anyway, right? Okay, so it hurts someone else, so we're going against the will of God, right? Okay, how about iniquity? Iniquity is the willful, determined, and persistent transgression of the divine law, the Father's will, right? That's the first half of it. So iniquity is knowing the sin is wrong and keep doing the sin over and over and over and over again.
You
That's
embrace it. You really embrace it as a
You embrace
disease.
the sin, right? Which embraces the evil also, right?
Right, but the sin is like more like, occasional. Yeah, I'm making an exception.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And there's no excuse to make an exception. There's really not. Okay?
Weaknesses.
It's weakness, that's right. What's part 2 of this iniquity thing? Part 2 is the measure, continued rejection of the Father's loving plan of personality survival and the Son's merciful ministry of salvation. So part 2 of iniquity is the measure we reject the what? The ascension plan, right? The loving plan of personality survival. What is that? The loving plan of personality survival is the ascension plan for mortals to make their way to Him, right? To paradise. And the other part of that is the Son's merciful ministry of salvation. So we not only have the rejection of the Father's ascension plan, but we have the rejection of the mercy provided by the sons of God for us to go on that ascension plan.
Which is what Lucifer did, because he rejected even when he was given
That's right.
mercy.
He spurns the Son's mercy, right?
In the end, this is really suicidal. You are basically disconnecting yourself from the universe.
Yeah.
As created,
Cosmic suicide.
You become irreal.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Not real. Yeah, that's
you're
exactly.
disconnected from reality, and you are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really cosmic suicide, any way you look at it. And that's why they call it in the book in another place, what? Cosmic insanity, right? Because it really is insane. You got a God that's trying to give you a way back to Him, an ascension plan, and mercy to get there, and you're rejecting it. So that's cosmically insane, right?
Yeah, and before that, you even reject reality is created for us. We have an environment that's created. Whatever everything is created with a purpose. So when you get off that track, it's like you want to create your own universe, your own ways. That it cannot be by definition of God being all powerful, all knowing, and having created everything. So you're basically disconnecting from all realities.
Yeah, yeah. You see why these three go together and they're so important? Okay. Okay. Diane?
By nature, before the rebirth of the spirit, mortal man is subject to inherent evil tendencies, but such natural imperfections of behavior are neither sin nor iniquity. Mortal man is just beginning his long ascent to the perfection of the Father in paradise. To be imperfect or partial in natural endowment is not sinful. Man is indeed subject to evil, but he is in no sense the child of the evil one, unless he has knowingly and deliberately chosen the path of sin and the life of iniquity. Evil is inherent in the natural order of this world, but sin is an attitude of conscious rebellion, which was brought to this world by those who fell from spiritual light into gross darkness.
Did y'all catch all of that?
But
we have a natural tendency of evil on this planet because many people don't pay attention to what the will of God is, right? But we are not the child of an evil one. We never have been. And because Adam and Eve defaulted did not make us all evil, right? And that's what the church said.
It wasn't a curse.
It wasn't a curse, no. Even Caligastia falling was not a curse, which created us in evil. We are not born in evil, it's just the natural order of the world the way it is right now. But if you embrace evil and you embrace sin and iniquity and embrace the attitude of the evil ones, then you are in conscious rebellion, right? You're rebelling against God. And that's what he's talking about here. And then he goes on to say, it's an attitude of conscious rebellion which was brought to this world by those who fell from spiritual light into gross darkness. So what Jesus considered, what Lucifer and Caligastia did, When they fell, they went from light to darkness immediately because they rebelled and they refused the will of God at that point. Right?
Whereas our track is the opposite. We come
Just
from
the op-
evil, right?
Yeah.
As animal origin, we
Yes.
are naturally evil. We are naturally selfish. We take
Yeah.
care about our own survival.
It's our nature.
It's our
Yeah.
nature to take
Yeah.
care of our own survival instinct. Right?
Yeah.
But as we evolve and with a decent environment, we can evolve from there.
Yeah. Yeah. We can. Rodney.
You are confused, Thomas, by the doctrines of the Greeks and the errors of the Persians. You do not understand the relationships of evil and sin because you view mankind as beginning on earth with a perfect Adam and rapidly degenerating through sin to man's present deplorable estate. But why do you refuse to comprehend the meaning of the record, which discloses how Cain, the son of Adam, went over into the land of Nod and there got himself a wife? And why do you refuse to interpret the meaning of the record, which portrays the sons of God finding wives for themselves among the daughters of men?
He even tells us where in the old scriptures there are references that debunk that nonsense.
Yes, it does.
It's only great.
So what's he saying here to Thomas? Thomas was brought up to believe that the beginning of time was Adam, right? And that Adam sinned and all mankind followed him sin into this terrible state.
Well, it was more Eve really than Adam.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
everybody blamed Eve for
Yeah, well, it was the partnership, Adam and Eve, right? They
yeah,
both.
it says Adam, but it really.
It really
men
is both.
today still believe it was Eve. The women are the ones that are evil.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But we know that's not the case. Why did he mention Cain and going into the land of Nod by getting themselves
'Cause
wives?
where did they come from? Where did all those wives
Where
come
did
from?
those come from? Yeah,
I mean, they weren't the first man and woman on earth.
that's right. They weren't the first man and woman
The
on
only,
earth.
the only. Yeah.
And it goes on to say, it talks about the sons of God finding wives for themselves among the daughters of men. What the heck is he talking about? He's talking about the Caligastia 100 who rebelled, going out, finding human wives and reproducing, right? And the women that Cain went to find were the descendants of the Caligastia 100 and those human wives. That's what he's talking about. So what is Jesus saying here? He's telling Thomas, it didn't start with Adam. It started with Caligastia, right? And him and the Caligastia 100 defaulting. And they being the sons of God, because they were the Caligastia 100, they were material sons that came down, right, to earth. They mixed with the women, right? So they started having babies. What happened? The whole land of giants came to be, okay? Because the Caligastia 100 were 8 feet tall, right? So that where do you think all the descendants of the giants came from? From them mixing with the human wives, right? Eventually all the giants kind of went away, but down through generation after generation after generation, but that's where they came from.
Can you imagine women having children? I mean, the human women having children being, I mean, they were small compared to Caligastia.
Having these huge children.
babies. And
Yeah.
how could they possibly, I'm sure many of them died in childbirth.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. But see, this is Jesus talking to him saying, do you not understand that in the scriptures, you have to discern what's going on. When somebody tells you that Adam and Eve are the first men and women, think. Use your brain, But that's not, we still teach this, don't we?
It's in the Bible in Genesis.
in the
That's,
Bible.
there's a contrast.
But so is
Beginning
this.
of
He's
Genesis.
referring to the Bible himself.
Right,
Yes.
Which is, by the way, a great lesson from us in terms of how to use
That's
take
right.
the good from what we have from
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
sources.
Yeah. Because it's in the Bible about
It's just incomplete.
yeah, it's incomplete.
But I think here he's not referring about all that. He's just referring about the fact that Adam was not the first human perfect, and then there was a decline that was way before. So I don't know what he's going to say afterward, but probably he's going to bring up the notion of moving up the ladder, right?
Right. Let's go on and we can finish this thought. Okay. Who's up? I think you are, Jim. Yeah.
Men are indeed by nature evil, but not necessarily sinful. The new birth, the baptism of the Spirit, is essential to the deliverance from evil and necessary for entrance into the kingdom of heaven. But none of these detracts from the fact that man is the Son of God. Neither does this inherent presence of potential evil mean that man is, in some mysterious way, estranged from the Father in heaven, so that, as an alien, foreigner, or stepchild, he must in some manner seek for legal adoption by the Father. All such notions are born, first, of your misunderstanding of the Father, and, second, of your ignorance of the origin, nature, and destiny of man.
Okay, so we are born in an evil world, right? But we're not necessarily sinful. In other words, just because we're born in an evil world doesn't mean we have to sin, right? And he goes on to talk about this new birth, baptism of the Spirit. What's he talking about? He's talking about believing in your own sonship, right? The faith Son of God. And that is necessary for you to believe in that to get entrance into the kingdom of heaven. You know, when Jesus says many times when he's talking to people that they are very close to being part of the kingdom. And even though they're religious people, they're not part of the kingdom. What he's talking about here is accepting your sonship with God, right? And this is part of that baptism of the Spirit. Does that make sense? So when you believe, you make the decision, you're a son of God, and you believe, that's when you become part of the kingdom of heaven. Okay? And you become a faith son of God. That's when the soul starts. Right? Because you're actually part of the cosmos at that point. Does that make sense? And he goes on to say here also that the potential evil in man does not make you estranged from the Father in heaven. Does not make you an alien or a foreigner or a stepchild. All you have to do is believe. All right.
What about actual evil? Because you can do actual evil without sinning.
Yes, you can.
So what does this do? Because he's talking about here. It says potential evil.
Potential evil. That's right. But what happens though, Jill, as soon as you figure out that something is evil, if you don't change at that moment on your attitude, then you go from evil to sin.
Right. But still, I think the actual evil does separate you. You don't need any you only need to realize it, come to the edge of sin and say, and then change, right?
That's right.
So you never goes onto the sin side, or if you do, revert as soon as possible.
That's right.
But
ask for forgiveness immediately.
right.
Yeah.
But you are still as evil by definition of evil. You are not in tune with the spirit, the will of God. So this is a form of separation. Evil is a form of
evil. Always is a form of
separation.
separation. Yeah. Okay. See who's up. I am. The Greeks and others have taught you that man is descending from godly perfection steadily down toward oblivion or destruction. I have come to show you that man, by entrance into the kingdom, is ascending certainly and surely up to God and divine perfection. Any being who in any manner falls short of the divine and spiritual ideas of the eternal Father's will is potentially evil, but such beings are in no sense sinful, much less iniquitous. Okay? You have to make the conscious decision. It always comes back to the decision. Right? All right? Hang on.
Thomas, Have you not read about this in the scriptures, where it is written, "You are the children of the Lord your God. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. I have chosen him to be my son. I will be his father. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth, even every one who is called by my name, for I have created them for my glory. You are the sons of the living God. They have the Spirit of God. They who have the Spirit of God are indeed the sons of God. While there is a material part of the human father in the natural child, there is a spiritual part of the Heavenly Father in every faith son of the kingdom."
What is he talking about the Spirit of God here? It's highlighted. Talking about the adjuster, is he not? The thought adjuster. Each one has the Father fragment within us. It's called the thought adjuster, right? And that makes us, anyone who believes in the Heavenly Father and believes in that thought adjuster, makes us faith sons of the kingdom immediately. Okay? All you have to do is realize your sonship. Okay?
All this and much more Jesus said to Thomas, and much of it the apostle comprehended, although Jesus admonished him to speak not to the others concerning these matters until after I shall have returned to the Father. And Thomas did not mention this interview until after the Master had departed from this world.
So this was a personal conversation he had with Thomas, right?
And why didn't he want him to say anything?
Because the things that he told him that day in the garden was for his benefit only.
And why?
He probably felt that it was Thomas's responsibility to teach these things to the other. That's the way he did things. He taught them to the apostles, expecting them to teach them to the masses. Right?
And he personally experiences and became a part of them.
That's right. If you would have been sitting and teaching, learning these things, Jesus teaching you, don't you think that would make a permanent impression on you forever? Wouldn't me,
5.
The same from our thought adjuster.
That's right. Exactly the same.
5. The purpose of affliction. And another of these private interviews in the garden, Nathanael asked Jesus, "Master, though I am beginning to understand why you refuse to practice healing indiscriminately, I am still at a loss to understand why the loving Father in heaven permits so many of his children on earth to suffer so many afflictions." The Master answered Nathanael, saying,
Well, this time he's talking to Nathanael rather than Thomas, right? So this is another personal ministry.
That's a question that comes often from the non-believers.
That's right.
That's one of the key reasons.
Yeah, over and over and over again, right? Okay. Jill?
Nathanael, you and many others are thus perplexed because you do not comprehend how the natural order of this world has been so many times upset by the sinful adventures of certain rebellious traitors to the Father's will. And I have come to make a beginning of setting these things in order. But many ages will be required to restore this part of the universe to former past, and thus release the children of men from the extra burdens of sin and rebellion. The presence of evil alone is sufficient test for the ascension of man. Sin is not essential to survival.
Okay, this is really so important, it's unbelievable. What he's telling Nathanael is this. It's the traitor, the rebellion, and the traitors of the rebellion that has upset and increased evil to the point of physically affecting us. Okay? You got that? So it's the evil, it's the sin of the rebellion that's put into motion certain things that kept our local planet from taking care of many things that make us sick. How is that? Adam and Eve,
Yeah,
right?
Their default.
Their default. Adam and Eve was supposed to uplift our human body, right? Make us more resistant to disease, things like that, right? Their default defunct that when it happened, right? We've got a very small part of the violet blood. Not enough to take care of all the things that were wrong because we were an experimental planet. Being an experimental planet, when Adam and Eve came, they were supposed to fix anything that was not quite right in our biological state and make us healthier. But since they did not finish their mission, then we ended up in the way we are right now. And we still have disease like crazy.
And that's still the number one question that people ask, if God really is a loving Father, why does He allow all these, people to suffer? Why do we have to suffer?
It has, how do I say this? It has nothing to do whether He allows it or not. What He allows to happen is normal evolution. And it's because of irresponsible administrators, Caligastia, Adam and Eve, the Caligastia 100, that we ended up where we were. They won't sidestep our experience of straightening this out, in other words. So God has nothing to do with allowing it to happen. What He has done is set up natural laws and rules, and He sticks to those natural laws and rules, and it's up to us to make the difference and make the change. Does that make sense?
It is, just to explain it to someone that asked you that question.
And it's unfortunate that people have to suffer because of this, but the sins of our brothers and sisters and those of the past do affect us, right?
And I think that's the major statement to make if someone asks you that question.
That's the main thing. The acts of the family affects the whole family. When a mother and father decide to get a divorce, they affect their own children, don't
Yeah.
they? Okay, there's no way around that. Okay, so the decisions we make in this life affects everything after that comes after. And it'll affect your children, it'll affect your children's children. But why? Because they make decisions based on what they know, and they learn those decisions by what they've seen in the past, their experience. Right? So it's just the way it is.
Well, but that brings
It has nothing to do with whether God allows it or not.
Well, yeah, but there are still two different concepts. I think the one you are talking about and Jesus is also talking about, I think, is the sin, the default, right? So which brings another question, which means on planets that have not defaulted, the Adamic nation has not defaulted, what would be the status in terms of disease and not disease? Probably much better than what it is here.
Much better, because their Adam and Eve would come and uplift their bloodline just like they were supposed to on this planet, and eventually disease would almost cease to exist. We know from just studying light and life, when you get to the higher stages of light and life, there is slight disease still, but not on any scale like there is in a normal planet, right? We've improved to the point where we've eradicated almost all biological disease. The things that are still around are what? Accidents, things like that.
Right. But so there is a big part of what he's talking about, and possibly in that part, the only part he's talking about is the default and the consequence of the default, and how much it has magnified the health aspect.
Right.
But there is, I don't know if he's going to touch about, but there is also another aspect which can be split in twofold. One is the ignorance part. So even if you have no such default, as you evolve, we are not all knowing. We make mistakes, and we still can get into diseases of some form or accident. And there is also I guess maybe the same thing, more on the bigger scale. If you are if you have not evolved to the point where you can feed your people in Africa, or where you don't have enough and you don't have water enough, and you are not evolved enough, well, you are in a pretty state of misery and you suffer from it. It has nothing to do with the default. It has to do with the fact that we have not evolved far enough to take care of it.
And we've not developed our brains, and they're smart enough to take care of them, because in countries like that, You have bad water, bad disease from the bad water. You know, it's all in learning these things, which we should have learned from Adam and Eve. But keep in mind too, we are a decimal planet. We are a number 10 planet. And every decimal planet they experiment with slightly. So on a regular planet, chances are that these disease organisms and things like that would disappear much quicker because their Adam and Eve would come and uplift their stock. And what else? Over a period of time, there'd be less and less of that because those disease aspects would not be in their DNA to start out with. So it's a more perfected life.
Right. But there are still wars along less and less,
Yeah.
of course, but there are still that. And then the other part along the same line is our own evil that we suffer from because we are disconnected and all the bad decisions we make, we suffer from that.
That's right. That's right. Let's go on to the next one here. Am I up again? But my son, you should know that the Father does not purposely afflict his children. Man brings down upon himself unnecessary affliction as the result of his persistent refusal to walk in the better ways of the divine will. Affliction is potential in evil, but much of it has been produced by sin and iniquity. Many unusual events have transpired on this world, and it is not strange that all thinking men should be perplexed by the scenes of suffering and affliction which they witness. But of one thing you may be sure, the Father does not send affliction as an arbitrary punishment for wrongdoing. The imperfections and handicaps of evil are inherent. The penalties of sin are inevitable. The destroying consequences of iniquity are inexorable. Man should not blame God for those afflictions which are natural result of the life which he chooses to live. Neither should men complain about those experiences which are a part of life as it is lived on this world. It is the Father's will that mortal man should work persistently and consistently toward the betterment of his estate on earth. Intelligent application would enable man to overcome much of his earthly misery. So embracing sin and iniquity causes these ills that happen in society. What other things do we do? What's part of the ills? We smoke, causes cancer. It causes all sorts of disease other than cancer, lung disease, things like that. We drink too much. All these things that are quote, quote, evil and can become sinful, we bring upon ourselves. So you pay for your own sins, don't you? I mean, any way you look at it. Evil, your own evil. Any way you look at it. If you live a life where you have no concern about what you put in your body, you have no concern how you treat other people, you have, all these things all come back to haunt you sooner or later, right? And we shouldn't blame God for those things which we cause ourselves, right?
Basically, we're responsible, and we are
That's
for
right.
everything we do and say and think and believe.
Yeah. Penny, you want to take the next one?
Nathaniel, it is our mission to help men solve their spiritual problems and in this way to quicken their minds so that they may be the better prepared and inspired to go out about solving their manifold material problems. I know of your confusion as you have read the scriptures. All too often there has prevailed a tendency to ascribe to God the responsibility for everything which ignorant man fails to understand. The Father is not personally responsible for all you may fail to comprehend. Do not doubt the love of the Father just because some just and wise law of his ordaining chances to afflict you because you have innocently or deliberately transgressed such a divine ordinance.
Speaks for itself. Mom, you want to read? No. Okay. Diane.
But Nathaniel, there is much in the scriptures which would have instructed you if you had only read this with discernment. Do you not remember that it is written, My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, even as the Father corrects the Son in whom he takes delight. The Lord does not afflict willingly. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep the law. For Affliction was good for me that I might thereby learn the divine statutes. I know your sorrows. The eternal, excuse me, the eternal Son is your refuge.
God is yours.
Sorry, my
Yeah.
cat is distracting me. The eternal God is your refuge, while underneath are the everlasting arms. The Lord also is a refuge for the oppressed, a haven of rest in times of trouble. The Lord will strengthen him upon the bed of affliction. The Lord will not forget the sick. As a father shows compassion for his children, so is the Lord compassionate to those who fear him. He knows your body. He remembers that you are dust. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He is the hope of the poor, the strength of the needy in his distress, the refuge from the storm, and a shadow from the devastating heat. He gives power to the faint, and to them who have no might, he increases strength. A bruised reed
Shall he not break?
A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax he will not quench. When you pass through the waters of affliction, I will be with you. And when the rivers of adversity overflow you, I will not forsake you. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to comfort all who mourn. There is correction in suffering. Affliction does not spring forth from the dust.
Okay, so we know that God does not afflict us, right? He is our answer for affliction. He goes through this affliction with us. And as the thought adjuster, he's always there with us, right?
All those were quotes from the scriptures that
Every single
Jesus
one.
was.
Yeah, he brought every bit of that from the scriptures. Every bit. All right.
6. The misunderstanding of suffering discourse on Job. It was this same evening at Bethsaida that John asked Jesus why so many apparently innocent people suffered from so many diseases and experienced so many afflictions. In answering John's question, among many other things, the Master said,
My son, you do not comprehend the meaning of adversity or the mission of suffering. Have you not read that masterpiece of Semitic literature, the scripture story of the afflictions of Job? Do you not recall how this wonderful parable begins with the recital of the material prosperity of the Lord's servant? You well remember that Job was blessed with children, wealth, dignity, position, health, and everything else which men value in this temporal life. According to the time-honored teachings of the children of Abraham, such material prosperity was all sufficient evidence of divine favor. But such material possessions and such temporal prosperity do not indicate God's favor. My Father in heaven loves the poor just as much as the rich. He is no respecter of persons.
So right off the bat, he tells him that this is a piece of Semitic literature. In other words, it's parable type thing, right? It's not true. People take Job as a real story, right? And it's supposed to be a story to teach you something, okay? And he goes on to say right off the bat too that material possessions do not indicate God's favor, right? That God respects the poor as much as he does the rich, and he's no respecter of persons regardless of how rich you are, right? All right. Let's keep on. Although transgression of divine law is sooner or later followed by the harvest of punishment, while men certainly eventually do reap what they sow, still you should know that human suffering is not always a punishment for antecedent sin, Both Job and his friends failed to find the true answer for their perplexities. With the light you now enjoy, you would hardly assign to either Satan or God the parts they play in this unique parable. While Job did not, through suffering, find the resolution of his intellectual troubles or the solution of his philosophical difficulties, he did achieve great victories even in the very face of the breakdown of his theological defenses. He ascended to those spiritual heights where he could sincerely say, I abhor myself. Then was there granted him the salvation of the vision of God. So even though misunderstanding suffering, Job ascended to the superhuman plane of moral understanding and spiritual insight. When the suffering servant obtains a vision of God, there follows a soul peace which passes all human understanding. So Jesus is telling us here, even though the parable in itself, Job did not really understand what was to be learned, he did go to the point where he understood the vision of God and spiritual insight enough to find soul peace. Okay? This is always a hard parable to talk about and explain to anybody.
The first of Job's friends, Eliphaz, exhorted the sufferer to exhibit in his afflictions the same fortitude he had prescribed for others during the days of his prosperity. Said this false comforter, trust in your religion, Job. Remember that it is the wicked and not the righteous who suffer. You must deserve this punishment, else you would not be afflicted. You well know that no man can be righteous in God's sight. You know that the wicked never really prosper. Anyway, man seems predestined to trouble, and perhaps the Lord is only chastising you for your own good. No wonder poor Job failed to get much comfort from such an interpretation of the problem of human suffering.
So he was no hope at all, then, was he? So his whole attitude was wrong to start out with, his friend. Hey, would you take the next one?
But the counsel of his second friend, Bildad, was even more depressing, notwithstanding its soundness from the standpoint of the then accepted theology. Said Bildad, God cannot be unjust. Your children must have been sinners since they perished. You must be in error, else you would not be so afflicted. And if you are really righteous, God will certainly deliver you from your afflictions. You should learn from the history of God's dealings with man, that the Almighty destroys only the wicked.
So what he's telling him, he's being punished, right? His children was being punished, which we know is not the case.
Curse.
Right?
And then you remember how Job replied to his friends, saying, I well know that God does not hear my cry for help. How can God be just and at the same time so utterly disregard my innocence? I am learning that I can get no satisfaction from appealing to the Almighty. Cannot you discern that God tolerates the persecution of the good by the wicked? And since man is so weak, what chance has he for consideration at the hands of an omnipotent God? God has made me as I am, and when he thus turns upon me, I am defenseless. And why did God ever create me just to suffer in this miserable fashion?
Okay, how many things can you find wrong in this paragraph? Almost all of it, right? You know, his whole attitude that God is punishing him and that God's not listening to him, everything about it's wrong, right? Jude.
And who can challenge the attitude of Job in view of the counsel of his friends and the erroneous ideas of God which occupied his own mind? Do you not see that Job longed for a human God, that he hungered to commune with the divine being, who knows man's moral estate and understands that just must often suffer in innocence as a part of this first life of the long paradise ascent? Wherefore has the Son of Man come forth from the earth to live such a life in the flesh, that he will be able to comfort and succor all those who must henceforth be called upon to endure the afflictions of Job?
So God has nothing to do with all these afflictions, right? That's the whole point of this. God does not afflict his children. Job's third friend, Zophar, then spoke still less comforting words when he said, "You are foolish to claim to be righteous, seeing that you are thus afflicted. But I admit that it is impossible to comprehend God's ways. Perhaps there is some hidden purpose in all your miseries." And when Job had listened to all three of his friends, no help, he appealed directly to God for help, pleading the fact that man born of woman is few of days and full of trouble.
Mhm.
He's throwing up his arms, he don't understand, right? Right.
Then began the second session with his friends. Eliphaz grew more stern, accusing and
Sarcastic.
sarcastic. Bildad became indignant at Job's contempt for his friends. Zophar reiterated his melancholy advice. Job by this time had become disgusted with his friends and to God, and now he appealed to a just God against the God of injustice embodied in the philosophy of his friends, and tried even in his own religious attitude. Next, Job took refuge in the consolation of a future life in which the iniquities of mortal existence may be more justly rectified. Failure to receive help from man drives Job to God, that ensures the great struggle in his heart between faith and doubt. Finally, the human sufferer begins to see the light of life. His tortured soul ascends to new heights of hope and courage. He may suffer on and even die, but his enlightened soul now utters that cry of triumph: "My vindicator lives."
Job was altogether right when he challenged the doctrine that God afflicts children in order to punish their parents. Job was ever ready to admit that God is righteous, but he longed for some soul-satisfying revelation of the personal character of the Eternal, and that is our mission on earth. No more shall suffering mortals be denied the comfort of knowing the love of God and understanding the mercy of the Father in heaven. While the speech of God spoken from the whirlwind was a majestic concept for the day of his utterance, you have already learned that the Father does not thus reveal himself, but rather that he speaks within the human heart as a still, small voice, saying, "This is the way, walk therein." Do you not comprehend that God dwells within you, that he has become what you are, and that he may make you what he is?
The whole point is God walks with you through all of this, right? The adjuster is always there. He's not away from you. He's not God's not this being way far away and you're trying to talk to him. He's within each one of us, right? And he doesn't afflict us in this way. That's the whole point of this.
Then Jesus made this final statement: the Father in heaven does not willingly afflict the children of men. Man suffers first from the accidents of time and the imperfections of the evil of an immature physical existence. Next, he suffers the inexorable consequences of sin, the transgression of the laws of life and life. And finally, man reaps the harvest of his own iniquitous persistence in the rebellion against the righteous rule of heaven on earth. But man's miseries are not a personal visitation of divine judgment. Man can and will do much to lessen his temporal sufferings. But once and for all, be delivered from the superstition that God afflicts man at the behest of the evil one. Study the book of Job just to discover how many wrong ideas of God even good men may honestly entertain. And then note how even the painfully afflicted Job found the God of comfort and salvation in spite of such erroneous teachings. At last, this faith pierced the clouds of suffering to discern the light of life, pouring forth from the Father as healing mercy and everlasting righteousness.
How many sermons have been preached on Job that Job, what they're talking about Job was correct? Many. But Jesus is basically telling that's not the way you should even read Job, because you should be able to discern how many things wrong it says in it. Right?
John pondered these sayings in his heart for many days. His entire afterlife was markedly changed as a result of his conversation with the Master in the garden, and he did much in later times to cause the other apostles to change their viewpoints regarding the source, nature, and purpose of commonplace human afflictions. But John never spoke of this conference until after the Master had departed.
7. The man with the withered hand. The second Sabbath before the departure of the apostles and the new corps of evangelists on the second preaching tour of Galilee, Jesus spoke in the Capernaum synagogue on the joys of righteous living. When Jesus had finished speaking, a large group of those who were maimed, halt, sick, and afflicted crowded up around him seeking healing. Also in this group were the apostles, many of the new evangelists, and the Pharisaic spies from Jerusalem. Everywhere that Jesus went, except when in the hills about the Father's business, the 6 Jerusalem spies were sure to follow.
The leader of the spying Pharisees, as Jesus stood talking to the people, induced a man with a withered hand to approach him and ask if it would be lawful to be healed on the Sabbath day, or should he seek help on another day. When Jesus saw the man, heard his words, and perceived that he had been sent by the Pharisees, he said, "Come forward while I ask you a question. If you had a sheep and it should fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, would you reach down, lay hold on it, and lift it out? Is it lawful to do such things on the Sabbath day?" And the man answered, "Yes, Master, it would be lawful thus to do well on the Sabbath day." Then Jesus, speaking to all of them, "I know wherefore you have sent this man into my presence. You would find cause for offense in me if you could tempt me to show mercy on the Sabbath day. In silence, you all agreed that it was lawful to lift the unfortunate sheep out of the pit, even on the Sabbath. And I call you to witness that it is lawful to exhibit loving kindness on the Sabbath day only to animals. Not only to animals, but also to men. How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? I proclaim that it is lawful to do good to men on the Sabbath day." And as they all stood before him in silence, Jesus, addressing the man with the withered hand, said, "Stand up here by my side, that all may see you, and now that you may know that it is my Father's will that you do good on the Sabbath day. If you have the faith to be healed, I bid you stretch out your hand."
That's what happened.
And as this man stretched forth his withered hand, it was made whole. The people were minded to turn upon the Pharisees, but Jesus bade them be calm, saying, I have just told you that it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath, to save life, but I did not instruct you to do harm and give way to the desire to kill. The angry Pharisees went away, and notwithstanding it was the Sabbath day, they hastened forthwith to Tiberias and took counsel with Herod, doing everything in their power to arouse his prejudice in order to secure the Herodians as allies against Jesus. But Herod refused to take action against Jesus, advising that they carry their complaints to Jerusalem.
He didn't want to get involved because he was already involved with killing John the Baptist. He already done enough.
This is the first case of a miracle to be wrought by Jesus in response to the challenge of his enemies. And the Master performed this so-called miracle not as a demonstration of his healing power, but as an effective protest against making the Sabbath rest of religion a veritable bondage of meaningless restrictions upon all mankind. This man returned to his work as a stonemason, proving to be one of those whose healing was followed by a life of thanksgiving and righteousness.
And that would be kind of hard to do being a stonemason with a withered hand, wouldn't it?
8. Last week at Bethsaida. The last week of the sojourn at Bethsaida, the Jerusalem spies became much divided in their attitude toward Jesus and his teachings. 3 of these Pharisees were tremendously impressed by what they had seen and heard. Meanwhile, at Jerusalem, Abraham, a young, influential member of the Sanhedrin, publicly espoused the teachings of Jesus and was baptized in the pool of Siloam by Abner. All Jerusalem was agog over this event, and messengers were immediately dispatched to Bethsaida, recalling the 6 spying Pharisees.
Okay, since their mission had failed so far, they recalled them, right? The Greek philosopher who had been won for the kingdom on the previous tour of Galilee returned with certain wealthy Jews of Alexandria, and once more they invited Jesus to come to their city for the purpose of establishing a joint school of philosophy and religion, as well as an infirmity of the sick. But Jesus courteously declined the invitation. Remember, when he was much younger, they invited him to Alexandria to set up the school, right?
About this time, there arrived at Bethsaida encampment a trance prophet from Baghdad, one Kermeth. This supposed prophet had peculiar visions when in trance and dreamed fantastic dreams when his sleep was disturbed. He created a considerable disturbance at the camp, and Simon Zealots was in favor of dealing rather roughly with the self-deceived pretender. But Jesus intervened and allowed him entire freedom of action for a few days. All who heard his preaching soon recognized that his teaching was not sound as judged by the gospel of the kingdom. He shortly returned to Baghdad, taking with him only a half dozen unstable and erratic souls. But before Jesus interceded for the Baghdad prophet, David Zebedee, with the assistance of a self-appointed committee, had taken Kermeth out into the lake, and after repeatedly plunging him into the water, had advised him to depart hence to organize and build a camp of his own.
He baptized him over and over and over.
Interesting.
What do you call it? Was what is the word? Board into. What is the thing? Waterboarding. He was waterboarding.
Yes, waterboarding. You know, we got a lot of these trance prophets around even today that probably ought to be done the same way. Okay.
On this same day, Beth Marion, a Phoenician woman, became so fanatical that she went out of her head, and after almost drowning from trying to walk on the water, was carried away by her friends.
Even even back then, right?
Out of her head.
So the New Jerusalem convert, Abraham the Pharisee, gave all of his worldly goods to the apostolic treasury, and this contribution did much to make possible the immediate sending forth of the 100 newly trained evangelists. Andrew had already announced the closing of the encampment, and everybody prepared either to go home or else to follow the evangelists into Galilee.
And that's how many of them were financed, right? And that's what we were talking about earlier. Okay.
9. Healing the paralytic. On Friday afternoon, October 1st, when Jesus was holding his last meeting with the apostles, evangelists, and other leaders of the disbanding encampment, and with the 6 Pharisees from Jerusalem sitting in the front row of this assembly in the spacious and enlarged front room of the Zebedee home, there occurred one of the strangest and most unique episodes of all Jesus' earth life. The Master was, at this time, speaking as he stood in the large room which had been built to accommodate these gatherings during the rainy season. The house was entirely surrounded by a vast concourse of people who were straining their ears to catch some part of Jesus' discourse.
And this is a picture of, I believe this is the one, a picture of the, this is the one we lowered the man down on the rope. See the ropes in the background you were asking about earlier?
I thought we had read that last week, last time.
Well, the house was thronged with people, entirely surrounded by eager listeners. A man long suffering with paralysis was carried down from Capernaum on a small couch by his friends.
Roger, it's not.
Huh? Oh, sorry. This paralytic had heard that Jesus was about to leave Bethsaida, and having talked with Aaron the stonemason, who had been so recently made whole, he resolved to be carried into Jesus' presence, where he could seek healing. His friends tried to gain entrance to Zebedee's house by both the front and back doors, but too many people were crowded together. But the paralytic refused to accept defeat. He directed his friends to procure ladders by which they ascended to the roof of the room in which Jesus was speaking, and after loosening the tiles, they boldly lowered the sick man on his couch by ropes until the afflicted one rested on the floor immediately in front of the Master. When Jesus saw what they had done, he ceased speaking. While those who were with him in the room marveled at the perseverance of the sick man and his friends, said the paralytic, "Master, I would not disturb your teaching, but I am determined to be made whole. I am not like those who received healing and immediately forgot your teachings. I would be made whole that I might serve in the kingdom of heaven." Now, notwithstanding that this man's affliction had been brought upon him by his own misspent life, Jesus, seeing his faith, said to the paralytic, "Son, fear not, your sins are forgiven, your faith shall save you."
So Roger, it took quite a bit for his friends to get him, not only him, but the couch, up a ladder,
Up the ladder,
to get up
on
on
the roof. They had to
My
remove tiles
goodness.
of the roof and then let him down.
I can see other people helping.
Yeah,
That's
That took at
motivation.
least an hour,
yeah,
and the
probably.
whole time making noise up there.
Yeah,
It makes you wonder.
yeah.
And then also, it makes me wonder also how from him being paralytic, what did he do to himself to cause it?
It doesn't say, does it? So it's something he did in his life caused it.
Well, he may have, jumped off somewhere and broke his back or something.
Well,
Right?
I had a
Like
friend
that.
who had jumped off a cliff where he had been many times to a swimming, and he had been drinking, and he jumped off into just a very small
You know,
pool.
All the way.
Bottom out.
And he, it was quadriplegic. And
Pam, would you take this?
When the Pharisees from Jerusalem, together with other scribes and lawyers who sat with them, heard this pronouncement by Jesus, they began to say to themselves, "How dare this man thus speak? Does he not understand that such words are blasphemy? Who can forgive sin but God?" Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus reasoned within their own minds and among themselves, spoke to them, saying, "Why do you so reason in your hearts? Who are you that you sit in judgment over me? What is the difference whether I say to this paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or 'Rise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you who witness all this may finally know that the Son of Man has authority and power on earth to forgive sins. I will say to this afflicted man, 'Arise, take up your bed and go to your own house.'" And when Jesus had thus spoken, the paralytic arose, and as they made way for him, he walked out before them all. And those who saw these things were amazed. Peter dismissed the assemblage, while many prayed and glorified God, confessing that they had never before seen such strange happenings.
The whole point is that Jesus had the authority to forgive sin. He was the creator of this little universe. And they missed that whole point.
Well, that's what the Son of God means. It means you represent God. You are fully God in
Yeah.
your own universe.
God
And
incarnate. Yeah.
so he is representing God. So
Yeah.
he's God.
Yeah. Damn.
And it was about this time that the messengers of the Sanhedrin arrived to bid the 6 spies return to Jerusalem. When they heard this message, they fell to earnest debate among themselves. And after they had finished their discussions, the leader and 2 of his associates returned with the messengers to Jerusalem, while 3 of the spying Pharisees confessed faith in Jesus, and going immediately to the lake were baptized by Peter and fellowship by the apostles as children of the kingdom.
So 3 of the spies ended up converting to Christianity, and the other 3 went back. Was it next Sunday, or the next Sunday meeting, we'll do 149, the second preaching tree.
So Jesus forgives sins, but not iniquity.
That's right.
Well,
Well, he will forgive iniquity also, but you have to ask for it. You know, all sin and iniquity can be forgiven, but you have to be repentant for that to happen.
yeah, but iniquity can persist. Iniquity is your own suicidal. So it doesn't make sense. Forgiving, you can forgive as much, it doesn't have any impact. It's meaningless. Those iniquities are cutting themselves off. Right? There is nothing you can do about it.
And many times people that become iniquitous go to the point where there's no return. In other words, they would never make a decision to return to God. That's the problem.
And iniquity is
That's by definition of iniquity.
actually sin.
Yeah.
It's just continuing.
Continuing
Sin.
on
So that would be
sin.
all the hardened criminals?
Yes.
No, be
Well-
anybody that turns their face against God, away from God. And they don't have to be evil, terrible people. They can be everyday people walking along that just has shut God out of their life.
So some hardened criminals may be still at the animal level. They may have even have grown out of that. So then that may not be their case. They are just far down the ladder. Iniquitous, to be iniquitous, you have to be risen up the ladder in terms of having some sense about what God's. You need to know what God's will is.
It's a
So
decision.
to know what God's will is, you got to have like a certain mind, and you need to go thought through. But instead of choosing God's will, you have chosen and persistently chosen to go down the path of your own selfish good. It would be like the criminals who are going to kill for selfish reason, knowing it's bad, but saying, I don't care. It's for my own good in terms of getting my money by being lazy or my own power. The politicians who are smart, they're all smart, but those who are doing not with a pure heart, who are really in it for selfish reasons, for their own power, that's if that's definitely sin, but iniquity if they are persistent to the point that there is no turning back. That would be the point where your thought adjuster will leave you, because there is nothing to work within your mind. You are fully dark, you are fully embraced in sin, with no point of return.
Let's go ahead and say a prayer and close for the day and stop the video. Diane, would you like to pray first?
Father God, we thank you so very much for this wonderful revelation. Thank you for Roger and his interpretation, understanding, and the time that he spends preparing for his lessons. Help us to assimilate all the information we received today, and help us to make it a part of our lives and to share with others as we have an opportunity. And help us to do good and to be reflective and appreciate the fact that our thought adjuster is with us, within us, helping us to be the best that we can be and to help others. It is in your name, Jesus, always we give praise and thanks. Jesus of Nazareth, Christ Michael of Nebadon. Amen.
Amen. And thank you for joining us at home. Please come see us again. Maybe over here.